why can't we simply create a national electric mobility fund? And I understand that the government is short on funds. The funds need to be moved to some other sectors for all the right reasons. I'm just giving a back of the envelope idea here that why can't we have a 1 rupee cess on petrol plus 1 rupee cess on diesel, and these both combined together can lead to about 12,000 crores annually to be deposited in a national electric mobility fund. And these 12,000 crores can be used to support domestic battery manufacturing, or about 15,000 fast chargers and 10,000 electric buses. Huge impetus, in my opinion, can be given to e-mobility market through this. And idea two could be a grand challenge for private sector cab aggregators and fleet service providers. Say, for example, we are in a post-COVID scenario where all your shared mobility again picks up. We actually have about 100 plus crore rides per year on Ola and Uber. And if they only have, say, about a 5 rupee contribution per ride towards electric mobility, that can lead to a self-generation of about 500 crores of annual electric mobility fund. Not taking out money from anywhere, but these cab or ride aggregators can generate this money within their own rides, and that can lead to about 8,000 fast chargers being set up, or 25,000 EVs being subsidized per year, again for these cab aggregators themselves. So nobody's asking money from the government. It's all self-generation of funds here. And idea three, I don't know how many of you will identify with this, but say the World Bank, ADB, and all these international development funds, they're all looking to pump money into India on electric mobility. For example, if a 1 billion fund for e-buses can leverage overall, and I've been a part of the World Bank before, that's why I'm saying some kind of co-financing between the private sector, government of India, and these funding organizations. So in my experience, it can lead to a co-financing of about 5 times. So a 1 billion fund for e-buses can leverage about $5 billion overall. This, very importantly, being backed by Government of India's policy clarity and sovereign guarantee, plus technical assistance for STUs and city level e-mobility plans. This can lead to about 50,000 electric buses funded in India. Huge impetus again to demand aggregation and from a consumer awareness side towards electric mobility. I leave you with these 12 takeaways and these 3 ideas, and that's where I'll end. So I'll stop here. Sangeeta, back to you. Happy to take it back again from you.
Thank you very much for the insight, sir. It was very interesting. Now, moving ahead, we have Mr. Divik, who is the CEO of Go Green EOT, sharing latest trends in electric vehicle manufacturing. Over to you, sir. Mr. Divik, are you there with us?
Sorry, I just unmuted myself. Yeah. Hi, thanks, Sangeeta. Thanks, eMobility Plus, for this opportunity. A quick run-in. I think what Karan said, there's a point to be noted, which was on takeaway number 4, where if you look at the second piece of what is taking a long time to adopt, rather what has been a challenge for adoption of electric vehicles, has been the safety concerns with technology. Taking a cue from that, that was at about 22%. And taking a cue from that, I just want to kind of quickly run in on, so I don't have a presentation, but I'm going to be telling you all about what are the multiple areas that either startups or companies can look at when it comes to electric vehicles itself. If you look at 50% of the cost of an electric vehicle, which goes into battery pack, there are a lot of opportunities with the battery pack itself. The way that I would want to address this is with how easy is it to get into the space, and how hard or how much of profitability is there in the space itself. So when you look at it from a cell manufacturing perspective, it is extremely hard to get in unless and until you have core technology with you. And also, besides core technology, the other big challenge that you're going to have is with your supply chain. So when you talk about it from a cell perspective, getting your technology in place and getting your manufacturing in place, and also the funds required to start a cell manufacturing plant is going to be extremely hard. The lowest hanging fruit when it comes to a battery pack is the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to this 50% of the cost factor is the battery pack making. That I would say it is still about it's still a medium it's still medium in terms of the amount of technology required or the amount of capital required. And the reason for this is, what I personally believe in is the vehicle and the pack making is a hardware in loop structure. So you need to understand what your vehicle really needs to build your battery packs. A lot of data that can be collected out of battery packs is only going to make your battery packs last a lot longer when you put it onto the vehicle. The main challenge, again, with this whole piece of battery pack making process, or rather battery pack making technology, is a very strong understanding on thermals. Thermals is going to be extremely critical, because in a country like India, where you have temperatures ranging all the way from, let's say, -2 degrees all the way up to about 40, 45, your thermals is going to be extremely important here. It is good to invest, but technologically, you'd have to be way ahead in terms of how, or rather, in terms of how you're going to cool the battery pack. The optimum working temperature of a battery pack would be anywhere between about 25 to about 35 degrees centigrade. Trying to keep it within this space definitely not only extends your battery life, but also makes sure that your product would not light up. The easiest side of the battery pack, or where you could actually look at manufacturing, would be your connectors, your nickel strips. That is an extremely easy space to get into, and your plastic connectors or your holders, which actually hold your battery pack. These are two of the areas which is extremely low hanging, easy to get into, good to monetize, and as you go, I mean, there's a lot of learning that you can get out of this space as well. Now, the other piece that I would like to touch upon is what is the easier ones. You could definitely look at the wiring side, materials and acoustics, where plastics, ABS or PCM materials and things like that. These are a lot of the low-hanging fruit per se. And especially, and lastly, what I want to touch upon is the charging piece. When you're talking about the charging piece, swapping is an extremely easy product to make. I am quite certain that we probably would have at least about another 100 people getting into the space probably by the next year itself. But extremely hard to monetize. That is where I feel charging is what is going to be the way forward. And charging, from a technology perspective, it is mid in terms of product, in terms of technology perspective. And I would say it's in between medium to hard in terms of profitability itself. So these are broadly the areas that today companies can look at getting into manufacturing, or rather people can look at getting into manufacturing for electric vehicles itself. Manufacturing of a complete vehicle. Now, it is a lot easier to do the below 250 watt if you're talking about a two-wheeler, even with an electric rickshaw, the ones which are not under the FAME scheme. Those are the easier ones to make. And the ones which are higher speed and the actual e-autos are the ones which are a lot difficult because of certification norms and because of advancements in terms of what you need to deploy as a product matters itself. With that, I mean, I'd be more than happy to take any questions around the thermal side. And Sangeeta, over to you.
Thank you very much, sir, for the insights. Now we will be moving ahead with our next speaker, Mr. Abdesh Kumar Jha, who is the Vice President of Charge, Drive and Sustainability, Fortum India, charging his insights on charging infra. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon, Sangeeta. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, very much.
Okay. Good afternoon, participants. This is indeed very interesting. And then I will start from where Kanv had started. You know, he get a very good insight with the consumer perceptions that the charging infrastructure is the major bottleneck. And, I would, if I'm correct, what he presented that UK, US or Europe market, the global markets also, the 45% to 69% respondent have said that the lack of charging infrastructure is the major concern. and in India it is 25%. So we can understand that probably, I mean, I don't have access to that, what was the total number of the people participated in that. But this 45 to 69% in the European market or the US market, this is a very good indicator. What does it indicate? This indicates that, because please understand, UK and especially Europe, they are a cold country. Reasonably, I will talk of the Nordic and all. And still they are saying that the lack of charging infrastructure is the major bottleneck. What does it indicate? It indicates that they are indicating towards the public charging infrastructure. They are not talking of the home charging, because home charging, you can do it by simply plugging in the 15 amp socket, and which almost every house in the Nordic or in the Northern Europe you will find. But despite that, if the respondents are saying that we require a charging infrastructure, probably they are indicating towards the public charging. And this has been our experience, because we are operating in Norway for last 10 years. And what we have observed that during the last 4-5 years, the trend has been more towards the public charging. And this is because the battery technology is improving. At the same price, you are packing more energy now in the same cost of the battery. Now that it means that you can go 500 kilometers, 600 kilometers, and that the battery size would be 60 to 80 kilometer per kWh. So it means if you go on a charging at home, that's preferably 3.3 or 7 kilowatt power, it will be requiring around 10-15 hours. Nobody has that much of patience in today's time. Even if the people can say theoretically that yes, you can plug it at the home and leave it overnight, but that's not the reality, and that gets reflected in the survey itself, that the people are still reflecting that the charging infrastructure, lack of charging infrastructure is the major bottleneck, despite being access to the home market. And we should also understand this from the fact that when the people say that the home market, home charging would be the dominant, then why we are saying that the lack of charging infrastructure? Because the home charging, in any case, you can have a 15 ampere socket and you can go ahead and you can plug in. So who stops you? So basically, the people are indicating that it is the public charging infrastructure that's the major bottleneck, and not the home charging or purely you said the charging. That should be read with the public charging. Having said so, more and more people's inclination towards is going towards the faster adoptions, faster charging. And why it's so? Because for 100 years, we have been used to using the ICE vehicles. Now, this experience on the behavioral part, human behavioral part, is very difficult to dispense with, very difficult to change. So what consumer is expecting? Consumer is expecting that, the electric vehicle, they are giving a fantastic driving experience, much better than the ICE. But at one front, the EV is still lacking in terms of timing of the filling of energy in the battery. So currently it is taking half an hour to 1 hour, depending upon your battery size and which charger you are charging. But globally, 50 kilowatt is the dominant form of charging at the public charging space. But now things are moving towards 150 kilowatt and 350 kilowatt. And 150 kilowatt gives you in less than 10 minutes, gives you around 125 to 150 kilometer range. And at the 350 kilowatt, it gives you 10 minutes, 300 kilometer range. Now, as a consumer, you would prefer to stop in the long journey, stop at one locations instead of stopping at a frequent locations. So if you have a charging where you can get 10 minutes charging and by 300 kilometer, it is better that I would go for that particular charging. So the trend is now moving towards this faster public charging, high capacity public charging, that's 50, 150 and 350. Unfortunately, in India, we have just started the journey, and the product which the most of the manufacturers are launching, because of the cost constraint, they are launching the very base product, where at max they would be requiring 40 to 50 kilowatt of charging capacity. That battery is not capable of charging at 150 or 350 kilowatt. So in India, probably we might have to wait, for some time before we have this 150 or 350. But in the long term, if you're talking of 2030 or 2035, in the long term, I strongly believe the expectation of the consumer would be to not wait more than 10 minutes at the charging stations. And that would be the genuine expectations. And by that time, this technology will be so much matured and scalable that the prices would be much lower at that point of time compared to today. So the trend is moving towards the fast public charging and the high capacity power charge. The another trend, which is moving towards is for the wireless charging. wireless charging is very important from the fleet point of view. So currently, what happens to the fleet? Fleet has to break their business, and they have to go to the charging station, stand in the queue because of the lack of charging infrastructure, or even when they're connected to the charger, they may have to wait for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, depending upon the battery condition at that point of time. What the wireless charging will do, let's say you take the example of Delhi airport. So in any case, the vehicles are waiting in the queue for picking up the customer from the airport. So if you have a wireless charging strip laid underneath the ground, and the suitable adoption in the vehicles, a modification in the vehicles, because this is the induction charging, then while the vehicles are still in the queue, they are getting charged. So they are practically not losing any opportunity for getting additional revenue, additional business. So the wireless charging is something which is very, very beneficial and the futuristic for the, I would say, the fleet. And when I say the future, it is not much far off. In Norway, Fortum is doing an wireless, charging pilot project in Oslo, where we have experimenting now with the fleet, and then probably in a year or so, we will have all the learnings, and then we will decide that when to market this on the commercial basis. But the wireless is clearly one of the trend which will come in India also very soon, because that would be the requirement of the fleet. And as Kan said, on the TCO basis, the fleet would be more interested and more early, to adopt the electric vehicles. And for them, if we can provide them some solutions which helps them to get the vehicle charged while they are waiting for ferrying the passenger, that would be something which they would clearly love. So that's I think the charging trend in the future, or the latest trend. On the battery swapping, because there's a lot of discussions on the battery swapping. So I clearly see that the battery swapping could be a good candidate case for a two-wheeler and three-wheeler, particularly in the delivery segment. But as far as four-wheeler passenger car is concerned, I do not see the battery swapping, taking off in that sector. There are two reasons. One, people are worried because of the Better Place experiment, because they had to invest. They had invested 1 billion and then they filed for the bankruptcy. But the second point is that, if you have a larger battery, probably you would be requiring some kind of standardizations. And most of the vehicle manufacturers would not prefer to standardize the battery in the form and the shape and the weight, because that is something which is a differentiator for the electric vehicle. So in the four-wheeler segment, and then more or less, once you have a 350 kilowatt, 150 kilowatt charging stations where you can get charged in 10 minutes, why would you like to get your battery swapped? Because in the battery swapping, the psychological factor also comes into play. If you have invested 30 lakhs, 40 lakhs in a good car, and then when you go to the battery swapping, you are not sure the battery which you are getting, how old this battery is, how far it will take to you. So all those psychological barriers would come into picture. And that's a human being. What we can theoretically discuss, debate, but you can't decipher that what human minds are thinking. So I think I will stop here, and I'll be happy to take any follow-up questions on this. Thank you, Sangeeta. Back to you.
Thank you very much for the insights, sir. Now we will be moving ahead with our next speaker, Mr. Pranshu Gupta, founder and CEO, Crank and Tell, sharing his insights on telematics.
Hi, Sangeeta. Thank you, and welcome everybody. Give me just a few seconds while I start my screen sharing.
Sure, sir.
So I represent Track and Tell. I'm the founder and CEO of Track and Tell. We are a telematics company. We've been around for a couple of years. I will spend about half a minute to a minute of talking about Track and Tell, and then I'll tell you what we've been doing on the EV side of things. So we've been around, like I said, over 10 years. We've got a lot of senior people from the EV and the telecom industry on the team. And one of our accomplishments is that we were recently awarded the Leadership Award by Frost & Sullivan last year. We have about 70,000 or so vehicles deployed within India, and this is a quick look at how vast our network is. Now, getting to the topic at hand, today's with the COVID pandemic and everything, I've been reading surveys, and On the left, as I've shown in the slide, people are not interested in public transport anymore. So taking buses or metros or even shared cabs, Ola, Uber, the cab pooling, those are not the preferred method for people who can, afford not to use those. Obviously, new car sales, used car sales, and two-wheeler sales is going to pick up in the Indian industry. The numbers that you see in the media is when they talk about the automotive industry and the negative growth, they're talking about the new cars and the new vehicles. But I see a lot of scope for the used car market, which is not really reported by SIAM and some of the other industry leaders. Now, the thing is, when if you can't afford a second car or a scooter, then what do? The options are possibly renting a car on a monthly basis instead of an EMI of some sort, or renting a scooter, or there are various modes of getting from home to office if you have a profile which is not work from home. Now, since we are in the telematics business, for us, we help our customers track their asset, which is the car or the scooter, and give a lot of information on top of that. Now, so I put together a couple of pictures just to keep this a little lively instead of having text on the screen. A typical telematics device talks about, what is the location of the asset, what speed you're driving it, whether you're overspeeding or not. There's something called geofencing, which is a virtual boundary. Have you left the Delhi-Gurgaon boundary or not? If you rented a scooter for daily commute, are you taking it to Jaipur, for example? An EV may or may not make it, depending on what brand and what the battery state is. And then there are other parameters like fuel monitoring. Theft is a big aspect of it, and reporting. Now, for the EV industry, we are working with a lot of two-wheeler electric scooter manufacturers in India. In fact, we're working with 2 of the top 5 manufacturers, and we designed some next-gen solutions for them. So the first picture on the top left is a fall detection. So if your scooter falls, whether you were riding it or while it was parked, you can get a notification with a telematics device. Things like wheel lock. The picture shown here is typically what the police does when you illegally park the vehicle. This is for a 4-wheeler. I couldn't find a picture for a 2-wheeler. But with electric scooters, the way they're designed with controllers and motors, it is very easy to physically lock the drive wheel of the scooter. And with a telematics device, you can remotely lock the wheel of the scooter either through a portal or through your app. The picture on the bottom left is somebody ran out of charge. In this case, it's probably an IC engine car. But the point is, you need to be able to track the state of charge. And as the previous speaker was saying, you don't know the state of the battery, whether it's a good battery that can actually hold the charge or it loses charge very fast. So again, with a telematics device, it can monitor the voltage drop, the power draw, and then give you an estimate of how many kilometers you have before you run out. So it's the distance to empty that is popular in the IC engines. Then we have alerts for when you need to charge your scooter. There are for the electric industry, there is a handlebar lock. What I've shown is a steering wheel lock. But so these are some of the features that we've added. Some of our shared mobility partners are using these features. Some of our OEM partners are using these features, and finding the EV is popular. Helmet locking is another feature that we've added. So especially for the shared mobility space where people don't return the helmet when they return the scooter. So I just wanted to take a minute or two to tell you what is new in the telematics space for the electric scooters. And all of this is, we are developing products which have most of these features. And this is what you start seeing on the road over the next few months as the adoption of the EVs starts to increase. A quick slide on the features that we have. I'll not read through this. Then there's the whole part about data and analysis of the data, figuring out the driving styles, riding styles, and optimizing the behavior, optimizing the experience for the consumers. In the interest of time, I'm running low on time, so I'll skip the next slide, but happy to take questions in the Q&A. Thank you, Sangeeta.
Thank you very much, sir. Before we proceed ahead with the next speaker, I would be quickly launching 2 polls back to back. First poll, who will play a major role in the big push for India's EV mission 2030? I'm closing the poll now. So we have a clear-cut winner over here, that's the government. Moving on to the next poll. Which segment of EVs will have a big leap in next? I'm closing the poll now. So 59% of audience agree with two-wheeler. Thank you very much. With this, I will move on to our next speaker, Mr. Varun Sahani, who is an Associate Director at Bounce, sharing his insights on new data sources in the rotation to fleet management. Over to you, sir. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Sangeeta and eMobility Plus for giving me this opportunity. I'll just second. So Bounce, if you know, is a two-wheeler smart mobility solutions provider. And I'll just walk us through what Bounce does, and hopefully my screen is visible. And just an introduction of what we do, who we are, and then go over to, I think, very, very concurrent to my previous speakers' opinions on data being the new oil. So I'll just pick up the thread from over there. So, Bounce is around 2 years old in the dockless business, currently present in major cities across the country. Around late last year, we started taking electric mobility seriously, and that's when our electric ambition actually came about, and somewhere around late last year. And over the course of the last 6 to 8 months, we deployed around 1,000 electric vehicles in the fleet. The overall fleet being more than 20,000, but the electric vehicles crossing around the 1,000 numbers. And we have done roughly, 1 million electric kilometers so far, with more than 20,000 battery swaps. So we've been on the battery swapping system mainly for the low downtime, that it offers. And because of that, we have adopted battery swapping. It also helps us conserve life of the battery with regards to fast charging. Because of the downtime and network optimizations, you can bring in a lot of value. So we started with battery swapping, and so far it has been a good success. And just wanted to say, with swapping, what happens, right? So you have a vehicle and a battery that is separate from each other that can come out, right? So with that, what happens is now you can add a lot of sensors and a lot of telematics, right, which was already spoken about, onto the battery and vehicles separately. And with this trend that we noticed, we can see a lot of value being generated with new sources of data. So you have a vehicle, which is simple non-connected vehicle, and you can go all the way to a fully connected vehicle with real-time availability of parameters across subsystems like chargers, batteries, motor controllers, any other sensors you might have. So typically, let's say, you're talking about a vehicle with, let's say, a GPS, 4G, CAN bus availability, as well as a swap battery. So now you have all this data availability, right? What do you do, right? So what we've noticed, you can do a bunch of things. And this is something we've already put into practice across, our fleet. And we've actually realized the value of this. we are fairly bullish on our electric vehicle ambition, and we feel that it is going to form the core of our fleet going forward. You can do asset safety. So for example, if you now have a tracker in your swappable battery, right, you can start tracking it real time. With CAN bus, you can do smart authentication. Let's say the battery falls into the wrong hands. You can make sure the battery is fairly unusable from the end, the end person's perspective by using smart authentication. And you can make sure that your assets only work in a closed user group. That means your chargers only charge your batteries only power your own vehicles. You can do a lot of real-time alerts for unauthorized movements. You can have, let's say, an IMU sensor on board that detects these movements, sends alerts, and you can have your manpower on the ground attend to these alerts. You can also integrate a lot of special sensors that I've already talked about. For example, helmet, uh, uh, the helmet lock and things like that. Uh, uh, Apart from that, you can make sure your asset has a long life, right? So I think most of us would be knowing about this. You can use a lot of the battery parameters, and the parameters that the battery is seeing, for example, the voltage, current, temperature, and essentially not just predict and estimate, but also take actions to, increase the life of your battery. So effectively, let's say you're able to increase your battery life by 5, 10, 20, 30%. That is, on a per swap, per use case, decreasing the cost by that much. So for high utilization, especially in fleets on battery swapping, this is a very important keystone. Things that you can do, you can change the charging rates, you can change vehicle duty cycles. What I mean by that is, let's say this battery is overheated. Somebody took it for like a 5 kilometer ride, and it's really heated. I can take it off the fleet for 5 minutes, 10 minutes so the battery cools down, and then put it on the fleet again for the next ride, right? So with these small tweaks, I can really increase my asset life. Apart from that, we can do status mapping. You can do use two. So for example, your vehicle and your battery now have two GPS signals. Can I now combine these two to create a much better accurate representation? I can geotag my vehicles. I can track transactions. For example, instead of just looking at my transactions, if I know with which partner my battery is or the location at which my battery is, I can now even tag my batteries with that. I can do network optimizations based on my demand, both on time and locations, and I can do metering. If I know how much energy my battery is consuming, if I have EV subsidy or other things, other advantages with my metering, I can even know how much energy was consumed and get that benefit, or even detect misuse, which is a big thing, right? So essentially, to boil it all down, for fleets, swapping looks to be the way to go, at least going forward. And with swapping comes new sources of data, especially on the battery, and with that come a lot of use cases. So we're happy to answer more questions and talk more. Thanks. Over to you, Sangeeta.
Thank you very much. Now we would be moving ahead with our next speaker, Mr. Sameer Ranjan Jaiswal, who is the CTO of Kirana Charger, sharing his insights on latest trends in charging infrastructure adoption. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Sangeeta, for the introduction and giving me this opportunity, and thanks eMobility Plus for the same. So being the last speaker on the panel, I'll end the discussion where it began, where Kun started it all. Lack of charging infrastructure is the biggest hurdle in EV adoption today. And India being a two-wheeler and three-wheeler heavy country, and two-wheelers, your previous poll itself has shown that two-wheelers are going to lead the charge, and three-wheelers are already leading the charge. We need a solution which is distributed and massive and highly scalable. So with this EV industry standing on the cusp of a revolution, the market potential is huge, but range anxiety is the biggest hurdle standing in the path of EV adoption. And for millions of electric vehicles already on road today, we have less than 500 public charging stations. So this lack of charging infrastructure not only affects one segment, it affects everyone across the EV ecosystem. At the top, there is a government who is going to benefit from EV adoption, not only fiscally, but in terms of foreign exchange benefits, in terms of geopolitical dependence on certain countries, and in terms of societal benefits as well. And yet government has to continuously depend on subsidies and grants to stimulate the charging station adoption and establishments. Then there are the OEMs who are continuously innovating and trying to bring in products which are matching the ICE vehicles, the petrol and the diesel vehicles, and yet they are not able to get the volumes and not able to compete with their petrol and diesel counterparts. If adequate charging infrastructure were to be present today, their sales would be at least 5.5 times the current numbers. Then there are the fleet owners, as Bounce is already doing. These guys are supposed to lead the charge. They are supposed to be the flag bearers in this revolution and lead the charge, because they are the ones who are going to see immediate and massive, benefits in terms of cost savings by having electric fleets, and yet they too are facing trouble due to lack of charging infrastructure. And finally, the public, which is the biggest beneficiary of it all, is willing. 90% of, according to a survey, 90% of them are willing to adopt electric vehicles if charging infrastructure is present, and yet we don't even see 1% adoption from the public happening. So clearly the biggest piece in this EV puzzle which is missing from the board is lack of charging stations and charging infrastructure. But people have a very wrong and dismal opinion about charging infrastructure adoption in India. So so for charging infrastructure to be such massively scalable, and as Karn pointed out in his initial presentation, the biggest cost is the real estate. In dense urban cities, how can you set up a charging station which is distributed and get the real estate for that? Public has got to be involved for that, and public is willing to set up the charging stations today and not 3 years or 5 years from now if you give them the right solution. When we launched Kirana Charger, when we were developing Kirana Charger, we had these issues in mind. We have been dealing with the public and their understanding around electric vehicles and their anxieties around electric vehicles, and we realized that public is willing to accept and adopt if the correct solution is present. And that's where we launched Kirana Charger, and the response has been tremendous across the spectrum. We have received organic interest, you would be surprised, from tier 1 to tier 2, tier 3 cities, from son of a tea seller in Madurai who wants to set up a Kirana Charger in his father's shop, to a big premium restaurant owner wanting to set up in his restaurant. We have received interest from single theater owner wanting to set it up in his parking, to malls wanting to set up Kirana Chargers in their parking. We have established textile merchants willing to wanting to set up a charging network in Gujarat, to establish timber merchants wanting to set up charging infrastructure in Haryana. So this clearly indicates and shows that public across the spectrum, from all tiers of society, are willing to adopt charging infrastructure and set up charging infrastructure if a right solution is provided to them. Right now, more than 97% of the sales of electric vehicles is two-wheelers and three-wheelers. And again, I mean, these are going to lead the charge. So if the correct solution is coming to, is being presented to the people and they're educated properly about it, they'll be happily joining the EV ecosystem as one of the biggest stakeholders, and the whole EV adoption will explode. So I think and this is not a problem for one of the players. It's a problem for the whole ecosystem, and I think we can all come together and solve this problem. Back to you, Sangeeta.
Thank you very much. With this, I would hand over the session now to Mr. Kankar for a Q&A round.
Thanks, Sangeeta. Sangeeta, I don't know how much I can do justice to this because we are just left with a few minutes.
So you can take out 10. You can take 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah. So we have more than 400 questions, panelists. So so I'll do my best to sieve a few questions for you. And of course, some of the questions which are much larger that I request the audience to take offline with you, please, or Sangeeta to do that through the e-mobility platform with them, please.
Sure, sir. I request all the speakers to kindly switch on their cameras and unmute themselves.
I'll try to also make your lives a bit easier, but by targeting the questions to some of you. This is based on my limited intelligence here. Question number one to Avdesh sir is that what do you think is the biggest technology challenge of charging infrastructure? Can you give us a very short insight on the cost breakdown of charging infrastructure? This is a question by Probo Nogoya.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay. So as far as technology is concerned, there is no technology barrier because charging infrastructure or charging technology is nothing but an electrical equipment. And we are quite matured as far as electrical equipment is concerned. So whatever limitation is coming on the charging, it's coming basically from the battery side, because it is the battery which ultimately has to decide that, at what rate they can accept the power. So on the charger side, there is absolutely no restrictions on the technology, and that's why you can see in Europe already the wave has started for creating the network of 350 kilowatt charger or 150 kilowatt charger, and they are decisively moving more towards 150 and 350 than 50 itself. But as far as cost is concerned, yes, now 50 kilowatt, since it is more than 10-year-old technology, so it has a scale, and cost is much affordable in today's time. But as far as 150 and 350 is concerned, since it is at a very early stage where the scale is very low, in entire Europe, you'll be finding approximately 200 chargers only of 350 kilowatt compared to more than 200,000 of other category of chargers. So the scale is much low. That's why the cost is currently, quite high. But nevertheless, in terms of, as the user, when you go to the 350 kilowatt charger, what you get, you save time, and the save times, it means you are saving premium thing, that's the time, and you are willing to pay a certain additional amount towards the charging fee, and this compensates because your overall cost of running of the vehicle is still much lower than the ICE vehicles, the 1.5 rupees to 2 rupees, in terms of kilometer. So I think that's all at this stage. Kan, if you want further more.
No, absolutely yes. So there is no technology challenge on the EV charging side. It's just the battery that defines the complexity part of it. Mukesh has a question, Divik, for you, that what is the approximate percentage degradation of batteries for say electric buses, and does fast charging has more dangerous degradation compared to slow chargers?
We make electric two-wheelers.
I know that, yes.
Yeah. Buses is a little off my radar, but nevertheless, what I know is a lot of bus companies are working on LFP for their batteries itself.
Right.
What I know of it is they're looking at least around about 10 to 12 years of life that's coming out of the battery itself.
Right.
That is part one. And part two, fast charging is definitely dangerous if you're unable to control the temperature buildup in the battery pack. But if you are able to control the temperature buildup and your dendrite formation, I think there's nothing as good as fast charging your battery pack itself. Technically, even now, what we suggest people is to probably do it at about a 0.3 C, which is, it takes approximately about 4 hours for a complete charge.
Correct. And one other question from Anand to you is, do we have any numbers or indications around the impact on the battery with the weight of the vehicle? Have you done some numbers around this?
The batteries of the weight of the vehicle, even now, when you look at it, an electric vehicle is a lot lighter than a gasoline vehicle. Right now, at least from a two-wheeler perspective is what I can talk about. But so more than the weight, what actually kills your battery is not the weight. It's more to do with your temperatures, more to do with your discharge currents, and more to do with your high charging currents and your state of charges itself. So it is very less that your weight of the vehicle has actually had an impact on the life of the battery pack itself.
Right. Sure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
Samir, a question to you from Mr. Ramnath Babu is that what would be the power requirements in order to deliver the EV charging infrastructure, AC or DC energy requirements? So essentially, I think the question what he's asking is that when you're talking about AC chargers, and based on the overall numbers that you've done, what could be the impact in terms of power requirement? So that's a macro thing what Mr. Babu is asking for. Can you help
Yeah,
us?
so thanks, Mr. Ramnath, Mr. Babu, for asking this question. Uh, I mean, so there are several parts to this question in terms of the power requirements that you need to have to set it up as host. You can start by having, just a 3.3 kilowatt power availability, single phase power supply, or you can have a three-phase power supply. Then you can go up to, 10 kilowatts, 20 kilowatts, 50 kilowatts, which is mostly not possible for a normal guy. And then, as Mr. Avdesh mentioned, nowadays it's DC fast charging is going to 150 and 350 kilowatts as well. Uh, Now having this, the impact of this comes on the grids as well. Right now, the impact on the right now the grids and the infrastructure that these distribution companies like Bescom in Bangalore have is not really ready to support a completely distributed and massive, scale of charging stations. But I believe you cannot wait for one thing before you do the second thing. So as we grow the charging stations and as the load increases on the grids itself, the grids themselves will start adopting to that load. So yes, if today's infrastructure and grids are considered, they don't have the capacity to handle the charging requirements which are there. And if 100% of the people or even 50% of the people today suddenly own an electric vehicle and start charging even in their homes, the grid would fail. But that's not going to happen, and the grids will scale along with the charging infrastructure.
Right. One other question for probably Varun is, what is the approximate space, Varun, that is needed to set up an EV charging? Are there any thumb rule numbers around that in your experience with Bounce?
Yeah, with Bounce, we are using the smaller chargers, the distributed
Right.
chargers. With the distributed charging, I mean, you could get away with a few tens of square feet, not too much. But as your scale of power increases, right, you need to have dedicated charging infrastructure, right? Of course, you can even have wall-mounted charging outlets which barely take up any space. I'm sure there are solutions out there. And as the scale increases, it might go up to the higher tens of feet, especially if you're talking about a dedicated transformer for fast charging and things like that, right? So no thumb rule per se. For smaller batteries, you can get away with a wall mounted or a small few square feet of space, just like a stand or something, and it can go all the way up to a dedicated station, with the four-wheeler. Yeah.
Sure. Avdesh sir, in your experience, can you help us? Can you help our audience with some thumb rules around the space required for EV charging, four-wheelers here?
Yeah, so I mean, as you know that charging infrastructure per se doesn't require much space. What the space you require is basically parking of the vehicles.
Right.
So if you are setting up a dedicated charging stations, then obviously, for the car segment, you need to have 100 to 150 square feet for per one car. So you can have one charger and you can have 2 or 3 outlets, and then you can have, accordingly the number of cars you want to service. And plus you have to obviously give the way for exit and entry, so that you can, work out. But then it is determined by which segment you are serving. For two-wheelers, it could be much lesser. For three-wheelers, it will be slightly higher. But the four-wheelers and the buses, it will be much higher, because you require a bus to park or car to park.
Right. Sure. Okay. Varun, so just quickly, just jumping back to you, are there any major technical challenges with battery swapping that you want to help our audience with, that they should be careful about?
Not really. I mean, so far we haven't had many technological challenges with battery swapping. In fact, we have seen better performance with swapping than with charging, for example, by limiting the fast charging rates and higher utilization, right? So in general, the technological challenges doesn't seem to be much that high. Batteries today can easily sustain drops of multiple feet and things like that. So even if you're talking about small batteries for two-wheelers, don't see many technological challenges over there.
Right. Pranchu, quickly jumping on to you, in your experience using telematics and data around batteries and vehicles, have you been able to work around some of the adverse impacts of weather conditions so that the users of electric vehicles can be better informed? So this question comes from a very experienced World Bank senior guy who's working on similar projects in the Middle East, and there all these temperature conditions are creating a huge issue.
So we have not had a requirement to look up weather information along with the GPS route. Okay. It is definitely possible within the telematics unit. It's just a question of getting the reliable data, meteorological data, and connecting it up.
Right. Okay. Okay. And are you also using your data and telematics into the overall supply chain so that people can see that, okay, where the components are coming from and all of that stuff? Can we also look at integrating some of that, given this current environment around local for vocal and boycott China, though I'm not a believer in that, but still.
So, supply chain, yes, there are a lot of customers that are into supply chain and use the telematics, but not for raw materials. It's for finished goods being delivered to customers.
Right.
So the last mile delivery, whether it's in the food industry or, courier, like Amazon delivery, e-commerce kind of things. There's always a cost issue. A telematic device is a cost for the hardware plus a recurring cost for the telecommunications.
Right.
So unless the value of the goods being being tracked is high enough to incur this cost, it doesn't really make sense for smaller items.
Right. Okay. Sure. So I can go on and on. So we have like hundreds of questions. So Sangeeta, if you think we have missed any particular questions or Ajaz feels so, I'm happy to take them.
Sir, I think we are done for now. I think if anybody has got any questions, you can put it across. I think we are done for now.
Sure. No, so thank you, Divik. Thank you, Avdesh, sir. Thank you,
So
Sameer.
with this,
thank you, Pranchu. Thank you, Arun.
So with this, I would like to thank all the speakers, all the attendees for joining us for today's webinar. I'm pleased to announce that we are coming up with an exclusive live interaction with Mr. Anant Nahata, who's the Managing Director, Exicom Group. So we'll be having this session on Saturday, 27th from 11:30 to 12:45. Registration link is mentioned on the chat box. So interested candidates can register themselves. So I'll see all the attendees tomorrow for an amazing webinar on top trends and predictions for lithium-ion batteries to watch in 2021, EVs and energy storage system. With this, I would like to thank all the attendees. Thank you very much. I would like to thank all the speakers for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.